UFC 299 betting and DraftKings show. We have 14 fights this weekend, $200,000 to first place on DraftKings. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. We're going to get things started in the women's flyweight division as Marina Moroz takes on Joanne Wood. This one is a rematch. We have a couple of rematches on this card, starting off with the prelim opener with Marina Moroz, a minus 230 favorite. The comeback on Joanne Wood is plus 190. And we'll start on the Moroz side. She won the first matchup back when they fought back in 2015. She won by first round submission, but we really can't take a ton away from that fight. It ended early. There wasn't a ton to go off of, and it's been almost a full decade since. So obviously we've seen some evolution on both sides, in terms of improvements. But as for Moroz, she's an okay striker, pretty well-rounded prospect, solid on the feet, solid on the ground as well. She doesn't really go to her ground game as much as I think she should, but the times that we have seen her go to the wrestling and grappling, she's been pretty solid, and I think that's going to be the biggest advantage in this fight against Joanne Wood, who's never been able to defend takedowns. That's her big weakness, that she's always had issues defending takedowns. She defends around 50% in the UFC. She's one of those fighters who has good pace and volume with her nonstop kicking attack, but her strikes don't really carry much power. So she doesn't really have any type of finishing upside. And again, she's constantly giving up those takedowns. Heavy leg kicking attack. Obviously, you're giving more of an opportunity for opponents to catch those kicks. So even with Moroz not being a super heavy, I'm going to push the wrestling type of fighter, maybe she can catch a kick or two. I think this one's competitive on the feet, and then Moroz has pretty much all the grappling upside. And I wouldn't even be shocked if she did pull off a submission, but I think more than likely she wins this one on the judges' scorecards. We're going Moroz by decision. That's the official pick. And up next in the flyweight division, we have Almabayv, a minus 455 favorite now. The comeback on CJ Vergara is plus 400. And I like the Almabayv side. Obviously, the money line, it is a big, hefty price tag to pay, but I do think he's the rightful favorite here, and he should be a sizable favorite because I think he's got multiple advantages in this matchup. For starters, I think his submission grappling is pretty good. I think his wrestling is not bad either, and I think he will be able to get this fight to the ground where he needs it. But it's also his striking, I don't think is that bad. He's got some sharp leg kicks, some heavy, powerful overhands as well. I just think he's a very well-rounded fighter. The only real concern I have about him is because he pushes such a heavy pace early in fights. The times where it does get extended, I'm not super confident that that pace is going to hold up for 15 minutes. But fortunately for him, CJ Vergara, I think is going to give him enough of these favorable positions that he wants on the map, because Vergara gives up these positions in every single fight when he faces somebody that tries to take him down. He gives up his back constantly. He puts himself in bad spots in grappling exchanges, even the fights where he didn't get submitted. Obviously, he got submitted against Tatsuro Taira, but also in the Clayton Rodriguez fight, gave his back up, nearly got rear naked choked. Also in the Daniel Lacerda fight, where Lacerda, spinning wheel kick hurt him, and then later ended up grappling him, nearly submitted him, took his back, almost rear naked choked him as well. Like, this guy's grappling is not good. And if you're going to continuously put yourself in bad spots against pretty good submission grapplers, I think more times than not, they're going to find a way to take the neck. And I think that's what happens here. So I'm going to side with Almabayv. I think he gets it done by submission. The question is whether or not you want to pay all the way up to $9,500 on DraftKings. He's the most expensive fighter on this slate. And this is a 14 fight card slate. So we have plenty of fighters to choose from. So it's really going to be a key decision point on if you think you should get all the way up to him at 9,500, as we've seen in previous slates with the help of Fight Pick Sim over at fightnumbers.com. A lot of these slates where you have more fighters and more fights to target, it's just that much more difficult for these super expensive fighters to end up on the optimal lineup. So this is a case where I think Almabayv could finish and likely will with a submission, but I'm just not 100% convinced that that's going to be enough to put up an optimal score here this weekend. So I'm going to side with Almabayv, but to be determined on how much exposure I'm going to look to get to him on DraftKings this weekend. Next fight up in the heavyweight division, we have Robelis Despain making his UFC debut. He's a minus 345 favorite. The comeback on Josh Perison is plus 250. And we'll start on the Despain side. Obviously, he's making his UFC debut, so we don't have a ton to go off of here. He's only had 4 professional fights, and he won all 4 of them inside the first round, all by knockout. This guy comes from a high-level Taekwondo background. He's a former Olympic medal in Taekwondo, so his striking's very good. There's no doubt about it. The way that he's able to move for a guy his size is certainly dangerous, even at the UFC level, especially at the lower levels, like a Josh Perisian. And I know there's probably going to be, the value boys circle jerking. Can't wait to put some money on Josh Perisian. You got to bet Josh Perisian. We know he can fight for 15 minutes. We don't know anything about this Despain guy. Well, guess what, guys? You don't have to bet Josh Perisian, because Josh Perisian is dog water when it comes to MMA. This guy has basically no skill. In theory, he should have a wrestling advantage. We saw on Despain's debut on the regional scene, he was facing someone that basically was able to hold him up against the fence until the ref had separated. It actually happened twice, but eventually once the ref separated, he did get the knockout. So in theory, maybe Josh Perisian can do that. I don't trust him to, and I think while the fight plays out at space, he's a dead man walking. I think Despain ends up touching the chin here, knocks him out early. We're going Despain by knockout. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our next matchup, as Michel Pereira's moving back up to 185 here. He's a minus 148 favorite. The comeback on Michael Oleksiejczuk is plus 124. And we'll start on the Pereira side. I mentioned he's moving back up to 185 here, but he shouldn't be that outmatched in terms of the size, because he was a massive welterweight. So I'm not super concerned with him bouncing back and forth between the two divisions here. What I am concerned with him is the fight IQ, because that's always a concern when Michel Pereira steps into the octagon. But at times we have seen him fight the smarter game plans. It's not every fight, but he has shown it multiple times where he goes to the wrestling, he goes to the grappling. When he does that, he's a good control grappler. Obviously, he has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but his control grappling is actually pretty good. And facing somebody in Oleksiejczuk, who's a very one-dimensional boxer. This guy, yes, he's been looking good lately. He's won 3 of his last 4 fights, coming off a knockout victory, but he's always had issues with guys that look to grapple him. He defends at under 50% in the UFC. This guy is going to get taken down. The only question is if Pereira's gas tank holds up, because I think on the feet, I think Oleksiejczuk's going to want to move forward and get that pressure boxing going, and I think he'll have an advantage doing that. I'm just siding with Pereira being able to get those takedowns and controlling him on the mat. It's just a question of whether or not Pereira can do that for 15 minutes if he needs to. I lean with he does, but I'm not super confident, so I'm not laying juice on Pereira here. But I think it's a fun fight. It's one you want to target on DraftKings across multiple lineups. You'll want to have exposure to both sides, but I'm going to side with Pereira here as the small favorite. Pereira by decision is the official pick. Next fight up, we have Ian Cutelaba, a minus 138 favorite. The comeback on Felipe Lins is plus 114. And this is another rematch because these guys were booked, months ago to fight. The fight ended up getting scrapped. Now they're running it back here. I lean with the Cutelaba side. It's always dicey, guys, when we trust somebody like Cutelaba. This guy's burned me a bunch of times in the past, but I wrote up in my article on fightnumbers.com this week, just when I think I'm out, he pulls me back in. So last time out, he had a first round knockout over Tanner Boser, and I think I could see this fight playing out pretty similarly because Felipe Lins is not a good minute winner. He's getting older. His durability is an issue. He's been knocked out in 4 of his 5 professional losses, and he's just a low volume guy on the feet, whereas Cutelaba, we know he's a high-pace guy. He's going to push a very relentless pace with the wrestling usually, and he's got big explosive knockout power on the feet. The only concern with Cutelaba is the fight IQ and the cardio, because after the first round, that cardio typically cliff dives. So it's certainly possible that he gasses out after 1 round and maybe Lins takes over, but I honestly would be surprised to see Lins make it out of the first round in that scenario. And so that's how I see this fight playing out. I think Cutelaba clips him early and gets him out of there. We're going Cutelaba by first round TKO. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Kyler Phillips, a minus 225 favorite with Pedro Munos on the comeback at plus 190. And this is one where I think the line's getting a little bit wide here. And we'll start on the Phillips side. He's somebody who's a well-rounded fighter. He's very explosive on the feet, and he likes to come out really trying to push a pace. The thing with Phillips, though, is he can't keep up that pace usually for 15 minutes. So he looks really strong early. He's got that big power in his punches, and he can push a wrestling pace. He averages a couple takedowns per 15 minutes, holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So he's got multiple ways to get you out of there. But if the fight gets extended, I don't really trust the cardio management. And he also, kind of sticks his neck out there a little bit. And you're facing somebody in Munos who has one of the better guillotines in the division. Munos is also one of the best leg kickers in the division, something that Phillips doesn't really deal well with. So this is one where Munos is old. He's certainly on the back end of his career, probably getting close to the dreaded R word here. But he's a guy who I think still has the skill set at this stage to present problems for somebody like Phillips. I think he's a live dog here. I'm going to side with Phillips just because I think those bigger moments are going to be on the Phillips side, but I have zero interest in laying this chalk price tag, and I think Munos is one of the more live dogs on DraftKings this week. On a slate where I don't love a ton of underdogs, I think Munos is certainly in play in that range, but we're going to side with Phillips by decision. I'm just likely going to have more of the dog on DraftKings. Next up, we have Mateus Gamrot, a minus 410 favorite with Rafael dos Anjos on the comeback at plus 320. And we'll start on the Gamrot side. Obviously, we know what he's bringing to the table. He's another one of those high-level wrestlers that are just going to look to put a pace on you. He averages just under 4.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. And I think that's going to be the biggest advantage in this fight, is not just the wrestling, but the cardio and the pace. I think he's just going to gas pedal a guy like Rafael dos Anjos, a guy who I think, for a while he was kind of defying the odds in terms of father time, but now he turns 40 later this year, and we saw, I think, a significant drop-off in terms of production against Vicente Luque his last time out. I thought he would beat Luque. I picked him to beat Luque, and he just looked old. He looked slow. He looked like a shell of himself. His grappling didn't even look good, which typically, he's a pretty solid grappler. And so this is one where I think Gamrot's just going to land rinse and repeat takedowns here and really just put a pace on Dos Anjos, one that he's not going to be able to keep up with. And I just don't see him winning rounds here against that style of pace that Gamrot brings. So we're going Gamrot by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have Maycee Barber, a minus 205 favorite with Caitlin Sermonara on the comeback at plus 170. And yes, that is Caitlin Chukagian for those that don't know about the name change here, but we'll start on the other side, on the Barber side. You guys know, if you've been listening to me for a while, I am not a Maycee Barber guy. I've bet against her multiple times, bet against her with Amanda Hebos, bet against her with Andrea Lee in a fight that I thought she lost. I think I've only really bet on her once, and that was the Miranda Maverick fight, where I thought she lost, but she ended up getting the split decision there. And this is one where I just think it's a competitive fight. Maycee Barber's not the cleanest striker, but she is a very explosive striker. She is going to let those things go. But the problem with her is, it's almost like we see this reserved version of her in her last couple fights. Like, coming into the UFC, she was just, I'm gonna just explode on these girls. They're not gonna be able to take my power. And then it was like she kind of turned into this Floyd Mayweather, play it safe on the outside. The Alexa Grasso fight where she's shadow boxing 10 feet away from Alexa Grasso. And then it's like these fights that are way too close for comfort, then it gets to the third round, and then it's like, all right, now I'm going back to my bread and butter. I'm just going to explode on these girls. And you kind of saw that in the Grasso fight. We've seen that multiple times where it's like she fights this safe game plan, and then it gets to the third round, and she's like, all right, yeah, now I'm going to go. And this is one where I think Caitlin Sermonara is a very well-rounded fighter. Sermonara is a good striker, probably the better technical striker here against Maycee Barber. I think she's going to be able to land a lot of those straight punches. She's got those front kicks as well, and she's pretty strong in the clinch as well. I think where my concern is that Sermonara does not defend takedowns well. She defends around 50%, and in a fight that I expect to be very competitive, I think what could swing these rounds, if they're very close, is the bigger moments on the feet, which I think come from Maycee Barber, and a takedown or two, which I think come from the Maycee Barber side as well. So it's one where I'm not interested in the price tag, but I do think just the overall physicality, the explosiveness, the big moments. I think it comes from Macy Barber, and I think she gets it done in a competitive decision. We're going Barber by decision. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our featured bout on the prelims as Curtis Blaydes comes in as a small favorite at -112. The comeback on Jailton Almeida is -108. And we'll start on the Curtis Blaydes side. He's coming off a first-round knockout loss to Sergey Pavlovich last year, and that was the 4th time that Blaydes has been knocked out. He's been knocked out in 4 of his 5 professional losses, and I bring that up because that is a glaring concern for me. This is a guy who has a very strong wrestling base. His cardio is great. He averages around 6 takedowns per 15 minutes, but we've seen over his last couple fights, it hasn't been the wrestling that's done it for him. He's been more of a striker, and his striking is good. It's just he doesn't have the defense or the durability to get into these big swinging wars with some of the most powerful guys in the division, and so that's why we've seen him pay the price, and I think it's a concern here because even though Jailton Almeida is not a great striker, he does have big power. He also is a very dangerous submission grappler. He's very physically gifted. The dude's an athletic freak, and I expect him to actually be able to put Blaydes on his back, something that we haven't really seen much at the UFC level. I think Almeida is going to pursue the grappling path. I think he's going to have success doing it, and I think even if he gets stuck on the feet at times, it's going to be one of those situations where Blaydes is the better striker, Blaydes is throwing more volume, but when Almeida lands one of those sloppy overhands, I think it could put him out. So I just think Almeida, I just think he has more ways to win here, and I just really don't trust the durability of Blaydes. That's what it comes down to for me. It's one that a lot of people are going to be split on, and I think rightfully so. You should probably just hedge it on DraftKings, target both sides. They're both cheap and priced in the mid-range, but I'm going to side with Almeida. I think he's on the come up here. We're going Almeida by TKO. That's the official pick. And kicking off the pay-per-view main card, we have Petr Yan, a -115 slight favorite with the comeback on Song Yadong at -105. And we'll start on the Yan side. It has been quite the fall from grace for Petr Yan. You know, former interim champion, has now lost 4 of his last 5 fights. But that has come against the best fighters in this division, and I'm just not quite ready to put Song Yadong in that category. These guys are on 2 different trajectories. Petr Yan lost 4 of his last 5 fights. Song Yadong has won 5 of his last 6 fights, but the level of competition of who they've been facing is pretty different here. Aside from the Corey Sandhagen fight, where Sandhagen beat Yadong, obviously the cut stoppage, I believe it was actually 2-2 on 2 of the judges' scorecards there, but it was a close fight, and I do think this could be a close fight as well. I just think it's one where Yadong's getting a little bit too much love because of the recent losses on Petr Yan's side, and they haven't even been all that justified because one of them was a split decision that I thought he won. The other one, he got disqualified against Aljamain Sterling. Like, he's had some unlucky runouts here, and it's not a skill set thing because I think from a skill set standpoint, he's probably the better striker here against Song Yadong. He's got a more variety of tools on the feet, and I don't really expect either guy to be grappling, but if somebody is going to be landing takedowns, I also think it comes on the Yan side. So it's one that I just think he's the better overall round winner, even though I don't expect him to be blowing out Song Yadong because Yadong's a very good fighter in his own right. I do think I just side with him to win more minutes here and win the round. So I'm going to go with Petr Yan by decision as the official pick. In terms of DraftKings, I actually don't love this fight, and that might be a hot take because they're both priced in the mid-range, and we usually like to target the mid-range pretty heavily, especially when we have notable name fighters like this. But I expect this fight to go the distance at a pretty high clip here, and I'm just not sure it's going to score all that great if neither of these guys are landing takedowns. We have just a striking-based decision where they're not popping off for 100 or so points. So it's one where I could see the field kind of gravitating to both sides, and I'm a little bit less interested than the field. And that'll be something that we run through on Thursday with Fight Pick Sim on the DraftKings Deep Dive show, and just see how often these fighters are showing up in the optimal lineup based on a decision win, maybe a knockout win, etc., etc. It'll be something that we run through a few scenarios on Thursday, but in terms of the pick, I'm going with Petr Yan to kick off the main card. And next fight up, we have Jack Della Maddalena, a -166 favorite with Gilbert Burns on the comeback at +140. And we'll start on the Maddalena side. You guys don't need me to tell you, this dude's an excellent boxer. You know, I kind of had some doubts, mostly with the defensive grappling when he came into the UFC, but it hasn't really mattered all that much because he's been knocking a bunch of dudes out. His first 4 fights, he all ended inside the first round. Now, we did see that defensive grappling issue start to, rear its ugly head against Basil Hafiz, where he ended up winning a split decision. Some people thought maybe he lost that fight. It was a very close fight. He definitely landed more damage, but Hafiz was able to take him down, control him for extended periods, and that's because Maddalena doesn't really have that defensive grappling if you are able to take him down, because his first level takedown defense is pretty solid, but once you get past that, you can control this guy on the mat, and that's where I have interest in Gilbert Burns here, because Burns is coming off not his best performance against Belal Muhammad, but Belal Muhammad's different from Jack Della Maddalena because not only does he not have as good of a boxing, that's a clear difference there, but he's got excellent cardio, and he's a very good anti-grappler, very strong takedown defense, hard to grapple, hard to submit. Jack Della doesn't really have that skill set. Burns is still a very dangerous submission grappler. Where I worry about Burns is if he just doesn't have the cardio. Like I mentioned, the Hafiz fight, Hafiz shot 20 takedowns. I don't know if Burns has 20 takedown attempts in his arsenal, but I don't know if he needs it either. So it's one of those things where I think Burns is a much more dangerous submission grappler than somebody like Hafiz, but he doesn't have the cardio to attempt as many takedowns as Hafiz did in that fight. But he might not need to, because Burns is good enough where if he gets Jack Della on his back just once, I think he could threaten with the submission here. Now, if he's unable to do that, and if he starts to get tired and stuck at space, he's very hittable. And the more tired that he gets, we've seen time and time again, the more hittable he gets. And if that's the case against Jack Della is going to knock him out. There's no doubt about it. So this is one where I think I could see it being a Burns submission. I could see it being a Jack Della KO. And so that just makes me lean towards the under, rather than having, a hard stance on the side where I do think there's value on the underdog. I just really find myself liking the under here. I think it's a pretty favorable price tag, around minus 130 currently, the under 2.5. I think this one ends inside the distance at a pretty decent clip here. So I'm going to go with the under. The official pick is going to be Burns by submission, but it's going to be one that I'm targeting both sides on DraftKings. And next fight up, we have Kevin Holland, a minus 135 favorite. The comeback on Michael Venom Paige is plus 114. Paige is making his UFC debut. Kind of a weird time to be making your UFC debut at this stage in his career. He turns 37 years old next month. He previously fought over in Bellator, had a very nice record over there, but it seems like he's more towards the back end of his career at this stage in his career. And, it wasn't just his last fight in Bellator, his last couple fights where I didn't think he looked as good, but it was also the Mike Perry bare knuckle boxing fight. Mike Perry was very competitive there. Mike Perry ended up winning. I don't know if I actually agree with that, but I don't know the full rules of bare knuckle boxing. But to me, when I watched the fight, it looked like Paige was landing the cleaner shots, but both guys landed volume. It wasn't like a robbery. I was just kind of surprised they gave it to Perry. But again, I am not a bare knuckle boxing savant, so I don't know the full intricacies of their scoring system. It was just, as I was watching it, I thought Paige was landing more. But I think this is one where Holland's actually just a younger, better version of Michael Paige at this stage in his career. Both guys are long. They're both good strikers. They like to use their length. Paige comes from like a karate striking style, fights with his hands down, tries to use that length. Holland's very similar. Not that he's a karate guy, but he likes to use that range, and he manages distance very well. It's also one where Holland, I trust the durability a little bit more. Holland's very durable. He's younger. He's been in less wars at this stage. Aside from the Stephen Wonderboy Thompson fight, he hasn't really taken a ton of damage. And then if either guy is going to be having grappling success, I think you have to favor the Kevin Holland side. I don't expect him to go to it because the guy doesn't fight the smartest at times, but if either guy's going to be landing takedowns or having any type of grappling upside, I have to think it's coming from the black belt and Kevin Holland, who we've actually seen land a couple takedowns to grapple guys at the UFC level. So it's one where I think it's competitive, but I side with Holland in the striking. And if he's going to grapple at all, then I definitely think there's some upside on the Holland side. So I'm going to go with Kevin Holland. Holland by decision is the official pick. Which brings us to our co-main event, as Benoit Saint Denis is a minus 218 favorite. The comeback on Dustin the Diamond Poirier is plus 170. And I know a lot of people out there are probably like, wow, I can't believe Dustin, he's such a big underdog to this, like, not really a big name French guy. who hasn't really fought the best of the division. I actually think the line is correct where it's at. I think people who got in early on Saint Denis, great bet, not just because the lines moved in their favor, but because I do think he should be a moderate favorite here because of that relentless grappling style pace. This is a guy who, after losing his UFC debut against Dos Santos, he's rattled off a bunch of straight wins here. He's finished every single one of those opponents inside of 10 minutes. He's just somebody that breaks his opponent's will because of that high level grappling pace. He's also very durable on the feet. He's got powerful striking on the feet as well. But I highlight the grappling because I think that's key here against Dustin Poirier. This dude across his entire career has never dealt well with guys that are solid wrestlers and good grapplers. And I think he's going to face one this weekend. Poirier's also nearing the back end of his career here, and I didn't really like what he was saying in interviews, like, why did you take this fight? Like, I just wanted to look myself in the mirror and see if I still got it. Like, he says some weird things at times, but like that's not inspiring a ton of confidence. But I just think in terms of the matchup, like he's always struggled with wrestlers and grapplers, and not just the Khabib fight. Khabib's doing that to everybody in the division, but one that sticks out to me very clearly in a matchup like this is the Michael Chandler fight. And Michael Chandler beat the brakes off of Poirier in round one for the most part. The only reason he dropped round one is because with like a minute left, Poirier rocked him, almost knocked him out, and then finished it up by almost getting the finish. Chandler kind of got saved by the bell there, but Chandler won most of the minutes in the first round. He comes back in round two. What does he do? Goes back to the takedowns. He controlled Poirier the entire round two. I think that's going to be kind of how this Saint Denis fight plays out. And that Chandler fight, it actually came down to round three where it was 1-1. Chandler went for a takedown. He ended up trying to take the back in an exchange, and Poirier just kind of let him slide over and ended up on top. That's ultimately what cost Chandler the fight. Chandler was hurt in that fight, went through a ton of damage. Chandler was tired as well. Like, Saint Denis is more durable than Chandler. He's got better cardio than Chandler as well. So in a fight that is scheduled for five-minute rounds, this is a co-main. They're not fighting for the belt, but it's going to be for 25 minutes if they need it to be. I'm okay with going with the younger guy here in Saint Denis, who I expect the cardio to be there, and I think he's going to push that heavy grappling pace. And I don't think Poirier is going to be able to hang around for 25 minutes, to be honest with you. I think Saint Denis just going to end up breaking his will and getting the submission. So we're going Saint Denis by submission. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our main event, as the bantamweight strap is on the line. And this is another rematch because these guys fought back in 2020. It was the infamous, O'Malley leg injury. So we didn't fully get to see how this fight would have played out the first time a couple years ago. O'Malley did look good early. After a couple minutes, it seemed like he rolled his ankle and did something that definitely messed with his ankle. And then it was like multiple times after that, he was just stepping on it funny and definitely made it worse. And eventually that's what cost him the fight. But I think this time around, assuming no weird injuries, I do favor the O'Malley side. I think the line's about accurate here because I just expect O'Malley to get up early on the judges' scorecards here. He's a very high volume striker, very dangerous striker as well. He's going to be active with the leg kicks, not just the calf kicks, but he's got a variety of kicking attacks that he can use here against Marlon Chito Vera. And Vera's a guy who historically has to build into fights, right? Like, he starts off slow. He's got excellent cardio and excellent durability. So those intangibles kind of make him a live dog in almost any matchups. But I just expect him to be losing the first couple rounds here because I don't expect him to keep up with the volume and the pace of O'Malley while O'Malley's dancing around the outside, pumping his jab, landing the leg kicks. I think O'Malley's going to be getting up on the scorecards, and it's just going to be too little, too late by the time that Vera is starting to work himself back into the fight. Because I do think Vera probably has the cardio advantage here, but I just don't think it's going to be enough because I expect O'Malley to be up, 2, 3, maybe even 4 rounds before it starts to swing in Vera's favor. So I'm siding with Sean O'Malley. He gets it done, and still this weekend, O'Malley by decision. That's the official pick. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings, ownership projections as well, the DraftKings deep dive strategy show, access to Fight Pick Sim, access to the exclusive subscriber Discord. This is a massive pay-per-view card with $200,000 to first place. So definitely check that out at fightnumbers.com. Has everything you need to know there. As always, I appreciate the support. Best of luck, and we'll see you guys next week.